So, Roger, this is our inaugural Buffs in Brief. Shall we tell people what a buff in brief actually is? Because it's not us in our underpants.
Buffs in briefs.
We have been accused on our YouTube channel of being both superficial and moronic recently. So we've decided to double down.
And be even more superficial and, well, hopefully marginally less moronic, but certainly more superficial.
Yeah. So we think that everybody is inundated by too much to listen to, too many podcasts, too much stuff. So we are doing a new series of shorter podcasts, just long enough for you to listen to while you're doing the washing up
Yeah.
or taking the bins out. It's like a short story, like a history short story. And we're going to base them around events that happened on this day or on this week, I guess, more specifically in history. And the one we're talking about is one that I find so interesting. This week, 70 years ago, was Nikita Khrushchev's secret speech.
Yes, very exciting.
To the Soviet
seminal moment
party.
in communist history, isn't it?
February 1956, an absolutely
February 25th.
Extraordinary day.
There we are. So listen,
Yeah.
you're gonna take the lead on this. Set the scene for us. Where does it happen? Who's there? What are the circumstances? What leads up to this?
Okay, so Stalin had obviously died in 1953, and when he died, Khrushchev was not the obvious candidate to take over. Apart from anything else, there was Beria, Leventi Beria, the terrible secret police chief. There were at least two, if not three people above Khrushchev in the kind of party hierarchy. But what Khrushchev rather brilliantly and beautifully did was actually take a leaf out of Stalin's playbook from the 1920s of making alliance, playing people off each other, using his positioning within the party to kind of effectively take control. So Khrushchev, by 1956, has emerged as basically the leader of the Soviet Union. Now, the Soviet Union, at the time of Stalin's death, he'd had great success, obviously, with a centralized planned economy, but with appalling human consequences, which is not something, that most of the party leadership minded. They were all very implicated in it. But the Soviet Union was in a bit of a state. The economy was moribund, particularly consumer goods, housing, absolute disaster. Foreign relations were very problematic. They were kind of sizing up against the United States, but they were much less powerful actually in terms of their military hardware, etc., than they were pretending to be. And crucially, there were 2.5 million people in the Gulag. 2.5 million people So in Stalin's death, 2.5 million people in the Gulag. Now, Khrushchev is not the only person who realizes that is kind of unsustainable. An awful lot of those people were detained during the war. There were mass deportations. It wasn't just political prisoners by this stage. It was, there were whole prisons full of like disgruntled bolts, for example, who were causing trouble. This was an unsustainable situation. So they start easing things up. And then we get to 1956, Khrushchev is the man in charge, and he decides to make what his biographer, Bill Taubman, calls the most reckless and bravest thing that he will ever do in his entire lifetime, this day, this week, 70 years ago. So that's the scene.
Which is essentially to throw Stalin under the bus.
Yeah. Not just any bus, a great big giant bus with pulverizing wheels. So it's the 20th Congress of the Soviet Communist Party. It had been convened on the 14th of February. So they've just spent 10 basically having Communist Party speeches. And I don't know about you, Roger, but that sounds pretty hellish to me. Can you imagine being stuck in a room full of earnest communists?
How many sets of tractor statistics can you bear?
Right. Anyway, so maybe it was just that sent him tipping off the edge into kind of madness, but probably not. No, it was a measured and deliberate wager. So the last day, all the delegates from the kind of foreign communist parties are packing up. They're going to leave. And then suddenly there's a call for an unscheduled secret private meeting behind closed doors just for Communist Party members. And they all kind of turn up. They don't really know what's going on. Up on the kind of top table, there's Khrushchev and a couple of other members of the presidium, kind of looking a bit agitated, a bit red-faced, a bit kind of sweaty. This is kind of shaping up to be something a bit unusual. Everybody's on edge. Khrushchev begins speaking, and he speaks for 4 hours denouncing Stalin and all his terrible acts. He basically accused him of mishandling the war. He attacks him for his monstrous deportations of whole categories of people. He attacks him for the terror. Basically, it is absolutely groundbreaking. And the people in the room are both electrified and actually still terrified. I mean,
Yeah.
Stalin's been dead 3 years, but his shadow is still monstrous. They cannot believe what they are hearing.
Yeah. And there are people taken ill in the room, aren't there, with
Yeah.
shock?
Um, People are so shocked. I mean, so there is a limit. So what Khrushchev does is sort of paint a picture of a man kind of corrupted and descending into a mania.
Mm.
So in this vision of what went wrong, there's nothing wrong with the system, there's nothing wrong with communism, there's nothing wrong with the state, there's nothing wrong with the Soviet. There is crucially nothing wrong with Lenin. It's all Stalin. Stalin corrupted everything. Stalin ruined everything if it hadn't been for him. Because don't forget, the initial kind of Bolshevik promise is that you need the party and the state in the initial period. But at some point, all of that withers away, right? And then people are just act according to a kind of moral code
Mm.
of a sort of, a
Yeah.
beyond class utopia. And all of this is supposed to happen, but it hasn't happened.
Utopia
Why hasn't
being
it
the
happened?
operative word. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's, one might argue it's never going to happen, but this is
Mm.
what, the belief is it will. And it's in this iteration, Khrushchev's version is that it was Stalin that corrupted it. And funnily enough, I mean, you and I have talked about this. I think that becomes a view that's quite prevalent elsewhere. Everybody conveniently forgets that terror was integral to Lenin's vision as much as Stalin's.
Mm.
This is a system which has terror embedded in its revolutionary heart. So it's quite interesting that we've subsequently kind of adopted the Khrushchevian position, as it were. So yeah, that was the day itself. And then the people kind of come out and, they're ashen-faced, they're trembling. They don't know if they can tell people, is this a trap? Are they going to
Mm.
spread what was said in that secret room and then suddenly the KGB are going to come knocking? I mean, it's not unlikely that that could be the case. So I think we cannot underestimate how seismic this moment was in Soviet history and in the history of world communism, actually.
The secret bit is interesting because it's not always billed as the secret speech, but it wasn't really secret, was it? I mean, in a sense, Khrushchev, to some extent, is making a power play for his own benefit, for his vision, and that necessitates throwing Stalin under the bus. But he needs to publicise it, and he does effectively. And other organisations also publicise it as well. So it's pretty rapidly not secret anymore, isn't it?
Yeah, it starts secret. It wasn't intended to stay secret. It's
Mm.
part of one of his maneuvers to get rid of a rival in the Communist Party. But also, I think it is a sort of genuine expression of this is how he wanted to go. He wanted to do something incredibly radical, actually. The Soviet Union had been a totalitarian society, and totalitarianism depends on participatory, dictatorship, right? The people have to be molded. They have to be curtailed and driven to the right place. And what
And
he
a
decided,
degree of engineered consent. Yeah.
engineered consent,
Yeah.
right? So what he's trying is something completely different. It's a kind of a communist state with rules, with the rule of law, effectively, even a sort of socialist legalism. And that terror is now taken out of the equation, and
Mm.
it's an incredible gamble. Can you impose a communist society on a people without terror? At that
Mm.
at that point, nobody knows. Can you? No,
No.
I mean, nobody knows. And that's one of the reasons why everybody's so terrified as well. Because even those, because nobody knows what it looks like. People have lived for so long now. I mean, it's 56. The terror started 36, 37. People have lived under the threat of of specifically random acts of terror. The randomness and the arbitrariness is partly what made it so destabilizing. And now Khrushchev's saying, no, we're not doing that anymore. It's not going to be random terror anymore. There's going to be rules. And if you break the rules, there will be consequences. If you don't break the rules, there won't be consequences. And that's a kind of radical thing.
Mm.
So no, he didn't intend it to be secret, to go back to your original point. And it kind of a shortened version of it goes out to some party members, and then it goes wider. The polls get quite an early copy. And actually, by June, it's in the New York Times. So by June, it's out there in the world. I'm going to recommend two brilliant books, but one of them is by Benjamin Nathans, and it's called "To the Success of Our Hopeless Cause," and it's about dissidents in the Soviet Union in the 60s. And he says that part of what happens now is people constantly having then to sort of probe and test what is permissible now. Nobody quite knows. What am I allowed to say? But it does institute what later becomes known as the thaw, right? It's the great thaw. And Solzhenitsyn described it as being able to breathe again. So it was a
Wow.
substantial loosening of the repressive horror of Stalinism. And I think it's an incredible and under sort of recognized thing that Khrushchev did this and took this wager. I mean, years later, Gorbachev would call it an incredible political gamble. And it is a political gamble, but it's also a kind of moral gamble. And yeah, I think this 70th anniversary should be much wider celebrated and known.
Yeah. I mean, I just jotted down a couple of things. I obviously spurred the Hungarian revolt. The Polish communist leader, who was basically another Stalinist, Bolesław Bierut, died when he heard the content of the speech, which is brilliant. I mean, he dropped dead. And there were riots in Tbilisi, which is quite exciting as well. I mean, there are riots in Tbilisi now, so, that's a constant thing.
The Georgians were furious.
Yeah.
Because he was a hero. They were like,
of course.
he is our
He was their
stake in
guy.
the Soviet enterprise. Yeah.
So, I mean, it's, and then ultimately 1961, another 5 years later, Stalin's body is removed from the Kremlin wall where it had been sort of ceremonially interred. So, there, it does have consequences. As you say, it does give hope to what becomes, I suppose, sort of reform communism and everything that followed. All of those efforts, 56, 68, even down to the the solidarity in the Polish revolt in the 1980s, to try and reform that system, to make it have the famous human face, as Dubček said. So it is absolutely significant, yeah.
I don't think they ever fully reconciled this problem of how you impose an unpopular system on people without terror.
Yeah.
And Khrushchev himself faced various challenges to his power on the basis of it as he went forward and was eventually deposed. But I mean, luckily for the Soviet people, his predecessors kind of accepted the premise that one should try. So listen, I'm going to recommend two brilliant books. The first is Benjamin Nathan's book about dissidents, which I've already mentioned, which I think is wonderful. The second is the biography of Khrushchev by William Taubman. I cannot recommend this highly enough. It's one of the best biographies I've ever read. It's so beautifully written for a punchy academic history. And if somebody's listening to this, they've finished the washing up. So that was our book in brief, our Buffs in brief. In a couple of days, we will be back with our next Buffs in brief, which is on the Reichstag fire, which our Roger Morehouse here knows a fair amount about. He didn't actually set it himself, although I'm sure he would have done had he been there. To find out who did, subscribe, follow wherever you get your podcasts.